Okay, welcome back. So this time we are going to go into the market, and after we have, heard presentations earlier on demand creation, and you've heard from the panel discussion earlier the importance of markets, projects that are being implemented in India, looking at how markets can be leveraged to improve diet affordability and accessibility and the quality, improve the quality of the diets. So now we are going to go into the market to access these diets. And this session is quite important also because as the global challenges like climate change and diet-related non-communicable diseases and food insecurity intensifies, market interventions become even increasingly critical in aligning economic incentives with public health and environmental goals. And so the presentations that we are going to have will be looking at how the evidence from markets can help us with determining what interventions can be implemented to improve the quality of the diets that we're all yearning for. And because of time, we've already spent so much time. I would like to introduce to you very five expert speakers who will be speaking to us about research that they have done in various locations. And so without much ado, I would like to call the first presenter, Lily Zedler. Lily is going to join us from online, and let me just try and get her profile and introduce her. So Lily is, if I got that right, because I think, Lily, correct me if I didn't get your affiliation right. I had to Google you. And Lily is a PhD student at Pennsylvania University, and she will be talking to us on a research that she and her team have been leading, looking at whether higher frequency of interaction with markets or non-markets, natural and social environments are associated with enhanced diet quality. Such an interesting research. So, Lily, if you are ready, let's hear you.
Perfect. All right. So thank you for that introduction. So I'm Lily Zeitler. As was already introduced, I'm a PhD candidate at the Penn State Geography Department, advised by Dr. Bronwyn Powell, who I believe is present in Tanzania today. And I'll be presenting on whether markets or natural and social food environments promote diet quality in indigenous food environment transitions. And so this probably isn't needed for this audience, but just to recap, food environments are the interface between consumers and the food system. So in the bottom right diagram, you can see the higher level panel of experts diagram and how food environments are situated between food supply chains and the broader food system and actual consumers. So it's where consumers go to acquire food. And the food that people are acquiring is changing rapidly. Due to a global nutrition and diet transition where diets are shifting from traditional diets rich in whole grains, fruits, and vegetables to diets that are more heavy in fats, sugars, and oils. And this is driven in part due to a food environment transition. So those environments in which consumers are acquiring food are changing, which is influencing their choices. And this is especially impacting indigenous communities worldwide. And if we look at Downs et al.'s 2020 food environment transition model, you can see in hunter-gatherer societies, they're predominantly getting food from wild food environments. And then with agrarian societies, you see the introduction of the cultivated food environment. Then with trade, the introduction of markets. And then as societies develop and industrialize, we see a phasing out of the natural food environment until societies might become more concerned about health and sustainability And then we can see a revival of community gardening. And I would argue here also the wild food environment also sees a revival, as we see with these kind of foraging influencers and elite wild food chefs, for example. And so the Downs topology, if we look at it more closely, they disaggregate natural food environments into wild and cultivated food environments and built food environments into informal and formal markets. And this is really noteworthy because it emphasizes the role of the natural food environment that has been overlooked in a lot of food environment research. And this is more inclusive of indigenous and rural nature-dependent societies. And this dichotomization between nature and markets in terms of food environments points to a broader debate about whether nature or markets support diet quality, with the nature proponents typically emphasizing agrobiodiversity and agroecology and arguing that free trade and globalization actually trigger that unhealthy nutrition transition that we talked about. Whereas the market proponents typically argue that free trade and neoliberal markets enhance food availability and access, and also the diversity of foods. For example, I can eat avocados here in Pennsylvania. And they argue that you need a high amount of agrobiodiversity to support diet quality, which isn't always feasible for smallholder farmers with small land parcels. And so I decided to investigate this debate further in ongoing indigenous food environment transition with indigenous Pakenyaw communities in northern Thailand. And you can see from the map, they're right up in the north. And here's a photo of my main field site. And you can see so it's very much a natural environment. And over the ridgeline, you can see their rotational farming systems, which is a form of shifting cultivation, but they rotate the fields every 7 to 10 years. But this is a highly modified version of that due to spatial constraints from the national park and intensification from animal feed corn adoption. And then there's increasing market access with improved roads and infrastructure. But there are still many natural food environments. So you can see there's forests, home gardens, fields, animal husbandry. And we're also starting to see little outposts of informal markets with these village kiosks. And so our methods included conducting 4 focus groups where we tried to find how local people classify their food environments and how they perceive those food environments using a preference ranking activity. We conducted household and diet quality surveys, and we conducted interviews where we went back to the households that had statistically significantly high or low dietary diversity to identify the conditions and factors that contribute to optimal or suboptimal dietary outcomes in a food environment transition. And so local people actually classified their food environments in ways that aligned with the Downs et al. Topology for the most part, as well as Bogart's topology about kin and community and how food sharing and a social food environment can also support diet quality. But there was one difference in that in a lot of environments, there was a wild cultivated crossover. They weren't necessarily separate, for example, in rice paddies, swidens, and home gardens. And so this led us to work together with Shauna Downs to integrate a wild cultivated continuum within her topology. And this idea of a wild cultivated continuum is really well established in other fields like landscape ecology, ethnobotany and ethnobiology, and even archaeology. And it's founded on niche construction theory that posits that wild species adapt to human modified landscapes. And our diet quality survey found that about half of the foods consumed the previous day came from markets, and about the other half came from natural food environments, and mostly from wild cultivated food environments, which were the primary source for grains, fruits, and vegetables, whereas markets were the main source for pulses, meat, eggs, and dairy. But none of the 244 food items consumed the previous day came from formal markets, which have typically dominated food environment research. Whereas this previously overlooked wild cultivated food environment was very important for diet quality. And so if you're interested in this work, please scan the QR code. It's a nice short paper. It won't take you long to read. And so when we actually asked people about their perceptions of different food environments, the natural food environment was ranked very favorably across all these different food environment characteristics, drawing from the Turner et al. Framework. And the social food environment with food sharing via kin and community was also ranked quite favorably, but markets were ranked very poorly, due in part to distrust over agrochemical contamination. And we saw that older generations actually preferred natural food environments more strongly than younger generations. And also older elders in the village preferred bitter flavors as opposed to younger generations that preferred these fatty and salty flavors. So we see these intergenerational shifting taste preferences in a food environment transition. If you're interested in this work, please check out this QR code. This paper was published just a couple months ago. And so our household and diet quality survey results have not yet been published. So I'm really looking forward to your feedback. This is an audience of experts. So I am very interested in what you think about this. So what we found was that food sharing, but not wealth, was associated with women's dietary diversity. And vitamin A-rich fruits and vegetables were significantly associated with wild cultivated food environments, whereas meat, fish, and poultry was associated with informal markets. And so for each additional interaction with a wild cultivated food environment, women's odds of consuming vitamin A-rich fruit and vegetable consumption increased by 0.3%. Whereas for meat and fish, the odds increased with 0.6% with each additional informal market interaction. And with each additional food sharing interaction the previous week, women's dietary diversity scores increased at a rate of 2.8%. And it didn't really matter whether people were giving or receiving food. Both were associated with dietary diversity, indicating that these are very reciprocal networks of exchange. And when we went to interview those statistical outliers, the low dietary diversity outliers typically said that you need money in order to eat well and buy food. And if you don't have money, you cannot eat well. So we saw very strong market orientation, that you need money to go buy food at the market. However, their economic opportunities had not yet caught up with that market orientation. Whereas the high dietary diversity outliers typically said, well, if you don't have money, you can just go look for food in nature for free. Or they might emphasize, people bringing them food if they didn't have food, and, relying on your community to support you if you don't have that food. So the key takeaways are that nature and community, rather than wealth and markets, is important for diet quality in some contexts. We can't universalize this. And that the food environment transition was associated with the food group substitution of market meat instead of perhaps natural sources of vitamin A-rich fruit and vegetables, which does align with previous findings. And the policy implications is that fostering social capital and access to natural food environments could be more effective than investing in market or wealth-based mechanisms for promoting diet quality in some contexts, and that secure land tenure and other policies that protect access to wild cultivated food environments, especially SWIDNs, could really help promote consumption of some key food groups like vitamin A-rich fruits and vegetables. Yeah, and so if you have any feedback, I would really appreciate it, especially on the later results, because those have not been published yet. So we would really appreciate your feedback. Please contact me on LinkedIn or send an email. And yeah, thank you for your time and attention.
I hope you just stay on your Zoom, and then we can call you back during the question and answers time.
Sure.
That was very interesting. When I was a child, 90% of my food came from the wild, but it was also a mechanism to cope with food insecurity. But because of deforestation and there's no longer forests where I was hunting for food, there is no such food. So and you also mentioned that 50% of the food came from the market, so especially in the urban areas. So I'm not surprised that this is happening now. And please keep your questions, especially Lily is a PhD student. One of the benefits of presenting at a conference as a PhD student is to get feedback that is different from what your supervisors would give you. So I will encourage that you ask Lily all the critical questions that will help her to improve on her work. Okay, the next speaker I'm going to introduce is Eileen Alpha. Okay, so Eileen Alpha is a senior researcher at the French Agricultural Research Center for International Development, right? And you and your team have been trying to answer a research question that went like this: what agroecological food system ecological food system interventions could be implemented to address multiple forms of malnutrition? So let's hear what you have found. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present a study which was supported by the Nutrition Research Facility from the European Union. I'm going to be presenting, but I would like to highlight my collaborating researchers. So Professor Rachel Besner-Kerr, Dr. Mustafa Sey, and Dr. Ninon Sirde. So we all know that our current conventional food systems are associated with huge health, economic, and environmental costs. And agroecology is increasingly recognized as a holistic approach that draws on ecological principles, but also social justice principles, and it poses an alternative to the conventional food systems. And a recent literature review found that agroecology can have positive outcomes on food security and nutrition, but there is less evidence on urban areas, diet-related non-communicable diseases, food systems as aspects of transformational agroecological transition, and Africa. So in this study, we aimed to examine potential impact pathways from agroecology to multiple forms of malnutrition of women in mixed income urban areas in Africa. And Senegal was chosen as a case study, first because malnutrition remains a major public issue in this country. Second, there is a vibrant social movement on agroecology and an interest of policymakers in this approach. So the research design, the research design for this study was an exploratory study, not an intervention study. And it was conducted from June last year to February this year for the data collection. So one part of the study was a market survey where 16 agroecological markets identified through literature review and preliminary fieldwork were analyzed, and 4 of them which met criteria such as being located in urban or peri-urban areas and selling agroecological products, including to low-income consumers. They were selected for in-depth analysis. So we conducted interviews with market vendors and producers. And the other part of the study was a consumer survey focused on women of reproductive age, which included a structured survey with 180 consumers in the selected markets, and also interviews and focus group discussion with consumers of agroecological products, but also non-consumers of these foods. So based on these 2 surveys, we built a conceptual framework of impact pathways from agroecology to nutrition of urban consumers, urban women consumers. So what are our results? We found that agroecological markets in Dakar and the surrounding region were quite limited in numbers and quite small scale, but very well established for about 20 years. Trust and reputation were at the core of the relationships between vendors, who could be producers, and consumers, as no labels or signs indicating that these agroecological products were used. And this was made possible through very frequent social interactions in direct sales or short chains. And this relationship also allowed for sharing values and knowledge such as health, freshness, lack of chemicals, and cultural values. And finally, we found that a range of strategies were used by producers and vendors to reduce the price and make agroecological products affordable for low-income consumers. What is the profile of these women purchasing agroecological foods in our selected markets, the 4 selected markets? A majority of them is in the informal employment, mostly in the trade sector. They have higher than average levels of education compared to national rates. They didn't perceive themselves as being overweight or obese, but we actually measure their weight and height, and majority of them were obese or overweight. And 1 out of 3 said that they had at least one non-communicable disease, such as diabetes. When we look at the frequency of food consumption, we show that the diet patterns are quite diversified, with both cereals and vegetables consumed at least 6 times a week. And agroecological products are among the most frequently consumed food groups, like vegetables, and especially during the dry season, so the season of vegetables production. Interestingly, also, women consumers said that they had changed their eating patterns with consumption of agroecological products. So 50% of them reported that they are now eating more vegetables, 25% of them more fruits, and interestingly also 48%, almost half of women consumers say that they are consuming less non-healthy food like bouillon, very high in salt. What were their motivations to purchase agroecological products? The top motivations were health, food quality, specifically taste, and lower exposure to pesticides. Women reported that they actually consume agroecological products either as a preventive measure for diet-related diseases or after having been diagnosed with non-communicable disease. So it's very related to health. However, constraints were also reported for them to purchase more agroecological foods, including availability of diverse agroecological products and distance to agroecological markets. We found at least 7 possible pathways to connect agroecology principles to nutrition of urban producers and consumers. First, through agrobiodiversity. So growing a high diversity of species of vegetables, fruits, herbs may contribute to increasing diet diversity. Second, the income that farmers and vendors gain from their involvement in agroecological channels may be spent in turn on healthy, diverse foods. Knowledge co-creation through farmer-to-farmer exchanges or between vendors and consumers can also help to promote healthier diets and increase culinary knowledge. Connectivity and trust between all actors can also help to raise awareness about food systems issues, have common understanding of these issues and create a form of social bond. It's not only a commercial relationship. Though access to culturally relevant foods was not that much emphasized, some initiatives did promote traditional foods like millet, thereby contributing to improve knowledge about health benefits of these foods. Exposure to pesticide is a pathway, as there is evidence now that this may reduce the likelihood of type 2 diabetes and other diet-related diseases. And finally, rights-based approaches aim to increase access to agroecological foods, as they include addressing access to land, market sites, training and support to scale out agroecological production, and in turn, it improves incomes. So several pathways exist from agroecology to better nutrition of urban low-income women, and some of which are quite similar to those in rural areas. We found cross-cutting findings from farmers and consumers, including the health motivation, trust between actors, the role of local authorities regarding access to land, market site, etc., and challenges, common challenges such as seasonal availability of agroecological products, the location of markets, and the difficulty to ensure fair prices for producers and affordable foods for low-income consumers. So I will end with three main recommendations. First, increased support for agroecological producers to deliver more diversity and volume of agroecological products. Second, change the food environments with more agroecological markets, but also public procurement of agroecological foods in schools, hospitals, canteens, and other public venues. And third, foster social connections between all the actors to build awareness, trust, and solidarity. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Arlene. When you mentioned that 1 in 3 said that they had NCD, even though this is a qualitative work, but that is really frightening. But when you went on to say that a lot of them were consuming unhealthy diet, then it explains why this is happening. And that also reflects Lily's early statement that our diet is changing and influenced by the dietary transition that we are experiencing. So thank you so much for this work. And hopefully the audience will have more questions that would help us to understand things better. Okay, I'll move on to the third presenter, Ludfred Kisoli. Ludfred is a lecturer at Aldi University. I guess this is in Tanzania. And you and your team have been examining how weekly food markets contribute to the provision of healthy foods in urban peripheries. We want to hear what you have found. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. So I'm Ludfred Kisoli from Aldi University, and I'm going to present to you some of the work that we've been doing with which is part of the Pash Farm project. And we are trying to examine the role of weekly food markets, but within the context of urban peripheries. And we're using Dar es Salaam as a case study. So just as a context, we know that we have several challenges within sub-Saharan Africa relating to urbanization and nutrition. And we know that from projections, by 2050, almost 2.5 billion will be inhabiting this region, and 60% of these will be in urban areas. And our pattern of urban growth has been, I think this is the case for many cities, that is, you have urban sprawl that is somewhat uncontrolled, and you have all these challenges with inadequacy of key services. And among them, of course, is food markets. And from literature, we say that most of the urban households, especially these in the peripheral wards, they don't really access food from supermarkets because there are not that many, especially here in Tanzania, and they would rely more on local markets or small shops. And in Dar es Salaam, we've seen an emergence of weekly food markets in all these areas where permanent food markets are somewhat either not existing or they are not well available. So we try to look at why is it that, of course, they seem to be markets that are offering, have a potential, but we know very little about them. So we wanted to first of all map these weekly food markets, and of course try to examine what are the different pathways that these markets do contribute to the provisioning of healthy foods in these peripheral wards. So as part of methods, we did use the food environment framework, and we look at weekly food markets. I think I cannot point it, but we look at these weekly food markets as part of the retail food environment, and look at how different aspects interact to sort of contribute towards acquisition and consumption for these households in peripheral areas. And we use the 5 municipalities of Dar es Salaam. It's a big city. You must have appreciated only a bit of it because we're in the city center. But of course, what we did was to go to all the markets that are considered weekly, as they operate once a week in a particular location. And there were 31 of them. So we did collect spatial data, but also we did have a survey that we did for vendors and, of course, buyers. And, of course, we did employ several analytical methods, of course, spatial, descriptive, but also to gauge perception of these different buyers on different aspects. Most importantly, we wanted to also see, given the food dietary guidelines, so we used the FAO 12 food group classification, but also the Tanzania's we call it Tanzania mainland food-based dietary guidelines for healthy populations. So I'll try to run you through some of the results. So in terms of spatial distribution of these markets, so the blue dots that you see are the permanent food markets. And then as you go outward, Dar es Salaam is there's a concept of the palm. So as you go outward, you go to other so peripheral wards, and you see less and less of these permanent markets and more of these weekly food markets, which is sort of they are stepping in to fill this gap that is existing because of lack of these permanent food markets. So what are the different ways in which we see these markets contributing towards provisioning of healthy foods? So one is availability. We did observe in all the 31 markets, what is it that is being sold? And of course, we could see high diversity, an average of 9 out of 12 food groups items are of course available in these markets. But of course, in some markets, not all markets had each and every food item in all the different food groups. Of course, there are some that are in short supply, like fish, animal source foods. And also to supplement this, we try to also gauge how do buyers perceive availability. And you look at the results, you can see that they are quite in agreement that food availability in these markets is much better. There's sufficiency, but also the quantity is also sufficient. Now, there are, of course, so we're gauging different statements on a 1 to 5 Likert scale. And there's one that, of course, we did also observe about what they say also in terms of the environment, apart from the fact that there is this high diversity. In terms of accessibility, we see that, so the blackish stuff you see, these are settlements, and we see that these markets are more dispersed across the peripheral wards, but also they are located either close to residential areas or along the major roads. And this really is backed up by buyers' perception, who see or rate accessibility as very high, either from home or from work. In terms of affordability, how do buyers see affordability of the different food items? So you'd see that majority rank it at 4, in agreement that the prices of food products are reasonable in these markets, but also that they're satisfied with the different the prices of different foods at these markets. And we wanted to also understand what are the values of these buyers in terms of driving their purchase decisions. And you'd see that most, of course, rate taste, acceptability, and preferences as key to driving their purchase decisions. And so, sort of confirming that they go to these markets not because they're accessible only, but also because they share some of the different values that drive their decisions. Now, there are other. We have quite a number of data and results, but I present here a few that try to speak to how these markets contribute to availability and, of course, other dimensions in terms of healthy foods in urban peripheries. Now, just to conclude, we see that these markets are a critical access point in the sense that they are a go-to in terms of access for fresh and affordable food items, but also we, of course, there are, from the results that we have, there are also indications that the market environment per se is not, there are issues in terms of cleanness, product arrangement, and others. But in conclusion, what we are trying to say from these insights is that there's a need for local governments to integrate these food markets into urban planning. And this can be done by designating market spaces, because most of these are roadside spaces, and these markets are considered as temporary up until permanent ones will come in. And we think that it's important that these weekly food markets be incorporated into the broader food rental environment and not be seen as something that is temporary, but rather part and parcel of the retail food environment. Of course, there's a need to improve the conditions of these markets. Of course, in terms of could be mobile shades, sanitation, waste management, and importantly, is imperative that there is deliberate governance strategies that integrate food systems into urban development with clear regulations of how not only these weekly food markets, but all the different food retail outlets operate, and of course, including issues to do with vendors, food safety, etc. I thank you for your attention, and maybe because I'm from Tanzania, I should say, Karibu Tanzania.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I was going to ask, well, it would be interesting to know, and I can engage you after the session, that the weekly food markets within the week, what happens if your food finish? So it's weekly. So if you don't get enough and then it finishes, where do you get to buy for the rest of the week? But yeah, we can engage ourselves with that. But it looks like this is quite positive, interesting findings, especially affordability, because I was expecting that affordability will be rated low because of price, the global market now, and the way things are, prices are shooting up. But it looks like it was rated quite high. Anyway, so I would want to introduce the fourth speaker, Wigeu. Okay, I got that right. Right. So let me try and find your profile. Okay, Wigeu is also a lecturer at the University of Pretoria, and you and your team have been exploring the role of small to medium enterprises and informal food markets in enhancing food security among low income consumers in South Africa. Let's hear from you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Wagayo Fitawa from the University of Pretoria. I'm presenting today one of the Pash Farm project paper that is sponsored by the Bill and Kate Mandela Foundation under ARC. So these are the authors that's a part of the project. So today I'll present exploring the role of a small and medium enterprise enhancing food security in low-income consumer in South Africa. This is just the outline of the presentation. So as you know, food security is a global challenge. Still, around 713 million people are food insecure, according to 2023 data. And South Africa also, around 21% of the population is food insecure, 50% are inadequate food access, and 6% are severely inadequate food access. So the food system still have a challenge to provide food available, affordable, and nutritious and safe food diet, especially for the low-income communities. So, but small and medium enterprise have contributing a lot to make food affordable and accessible, especially for the low-income communities. So, according to the previous speaker, my research also more or less related to street vendors and spaza shop in South Africa. And there are limited information on this aspect in South Africa. These are the objectives of the study. So try to assess the status of food insecurity in low-income communities, especially in urban and peri-urban areas. And the second objective is to investigate the role of small and medium enterprise to contribute food insecurity. So the role of small and medium enterprise is explaining they make food affordable and accessible, especially for the low-income communities. On average, in sub-Saharan Africa, smallholder farmers and small and medium enterprise provide around 75% of the 75 to 90% of the food. Especially in South Africa, like we call it spaza shop, that is living in the pre-urban areas, that is providing or supplying food, both dry food, vegetable, and other groceries. And there is also street vendors that are most of the time informal food vendors that are selling both cooked food and dry food, vegetable, and fruit. So this is just a conceptual framework, how small and medium enterprise contributing to improve food security or improve nutrition and safe food. So this small and medium enterprise provide job access for the owner of small and medium enterprise, especially those street vendors. Mostly they are women. They are the owner of those medium enterprise. That means it is a good opportunity for creating job opportunity that helps them to improve their income and finally improve their diet. Besides, for the owner of the small and medium enterprise, this small and medium enterprise also helping food accessible and affordable, especially for the low-income communities in urban and the pre-urban areas. So the study is undertaken in the Johannesburg and Pretoria, in the two big cities in South Africa. This is the economic hub, and most of SMEs found in around 37% of the SMEs found in this Gauteng province. That's why we selected the two cities. A total of 438 consumers are interviewed for this household. We use primary data that were collected from June to July 2024. So this is the area, the sampling area. And this is just the sampling urban and pre-urban areas. So we use, as you know, food security is a multidimensional, and it's difficult to capture with one food security indicator. We try to use a different time frame, like household dietary diversity, a 24 hours recall period data, food consumption score. It is a 7 days recall period data, and food insecurity experience scale. It is an indirect measure of food insecurity. So we'll ask households how they are experiencing with a shortage of food or resource. And for also use multinomial logistic regression to identify the determinant factors of food insecurity. So in this case, for multinomial logistic regression, we only use household dietary diversity and food insecurity experience scale result. I will explain why the reason we only choose the two. So according to WFP, this is a guideline for household dietary diversity. It's a group of 12 food groups, and for food consumption score, it is 9 food groups, but we are using the weight for food consumption score. And this is for the food insecurity experience scale. There are a total of 8 questions what the household is implementing when they have food or resource shortage for the last 12 months. So this is after we do the analysis, the household are categorizing in different groups. According to the household dietary diversity, the household will be categorizing into 3: adequate dietary diversity if the household dietary diversity score is greater than 6, moderate if it is 4 and 5, and inadequate if it is less than 3 groups. That means if the household is consuming less than 3 food types for the last 24 hours, they are categorizing under inadequate dietary diversity. And according to food consumption score result, if the food consumption score result is greater than 35, this is unacceptable. And then 21.5 to 35, it is borderline. And if it is less than 21, it is categorizing under poor. And for food experience scale, also it have 4 categories: food secure, mild, moderate, and severe food insecurity. So this is just a formula for multinomial logistic regression. So we use the relative price, the relative risk ratio to explain the result. And in multinomial logistic regression, we're only considering the household dietary diversity and food insecurity experience scale result. So this is just to get the overview of the descriptive result. So 60% of the household are from Pretoria. This is because of the reason of safety and proximity compared to from Johannesburg. And 64% of the respondents are male-headed. and the majority of the household is or the consumer is under the age group from 31 to 40, and the majority of the household is single, 49.27, compared to married households. And most of the household is attended secondary school and so on. So, okay. So this is the mean average age is 14.26. So this is the household data diversity score. And as you see here, 92% of the household is consuming grain for the last 24 hours. And from here, you can see in South Africa, the main source of protein is meat compared to legume, because legume is the least consumed food. And this is the food consumption score result. And the majority of the household is consuming main staple or 68% for the last 7 days. And still pulse is consumed by less than 3 days by 91% of the household. And the majority of the household, around 56%, they are implementing during food shortage, they went out without eating the whole day, and they were also didn't eat. So this is the general or categories. So based on the household dietary diversity, 48% of the household is categorizing under adequate dietary diversity, and but based on our food consumption score, 88%. This is maybe because of the weight, because dairy product and meat are weighting like 4. So as I said, in South Africa, the most protein source is meat. So that's why maybe there is a variation. That's why we drop food consumption score from the multinomial logistic regression, but the food insecurity experience scale and household dietary diversity is giving us more or less consistent result. According to this, we use for moderate dietary diversity, there are 3 variables are statistically significant, but for inadequate, there are 7. This is indicating that to move from adequate to inadequate, we need less interventions than to move from inadequate to adequate. In that case, we need 7 intervention mechanisms to move the household from inadequate to adequate. Sorry, I'm run out of time. That's what I'm trying. So for food insecurity score, for 3 categories, there are 4 variables that are statistically significant. And this is the main reason of the household become food insecurity. Low income, unemployment, and high food price are the main reason. And this is an interesting result. Source of the food from local market, as I said, spaza shop, they are trying to deliver most of the food, but when you see the street vendors for the household, most of the vegetables, 64% of the household, they get the vegetable from street vendors, and 63% of the household also, they get their fruit from street vendors. But from this result, dairy products and poultry are they are not supplied by street vendors. This is maybe because of those street vendors are illegal and they are not getting like training, and they don't have capacity to build. So in conclusion, the contribution of street vendors are very high, but as I say, they are informal. They are not getting enough training for improving food safety and so on. So we are government have to consider to give access to be formalized and maybe to build their capacity. Thank you so much.
I was going to commend us for doing well with time until you nearly ran out of time, but you were within it. So thank you so much. I think, I don't know your experience of using all these 3 indicators, but I think there has been a discussion ongoing, which I'm part, that it is time for us to standardize all these indicators. I mean, so many indicators of food insecurity into one indicator, so that, I mean, researchers will not have to use 3 indicators to do one research. And then I also wanted to say that we are expecting a paper that also looks at the impact of social enterprise intervention on food insecurity. And if it is published, I'll share that with you because it aligns well with your work. Okay, so I would now call on the last presenter, and then we can. So Martin Watts is from the University of Sheffield. He's a postdoctoral research fellow, and he is going to present to us work that he's been doing, exploring the role of yes. Okay, so he's been using qualitative methods to look at how gender and other socioeconomic inequalities shape rural Indian women interaction with their market environment to acquire nutrient-dense foods, right? Okay, so you are our last presenter, and the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, I'm Martin. I'll be presenting some work from our Infusion project, sponsored by, or funded by, by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the FCDO. And these are some findings from our formative research we did last year in the summer. So the adequate consumption of nutrient-dense food, such as fruits, vegetables, and animal source foods in diet is important. The consumption of these foods has been seen to reduce things like cancer, heart disease, and mortality. And markets are crucial sources of these nutrient-dense foods, especially in rural LMIC settings, settings where producers in these areas tend to lack sufficient land holdings to sufficiently sustain themselves with these healthy diets. However, market access is not uniform. For example, women's access to markets is heterogeneous. Markets can also lack basic infrastructure and sanitation, creating these unwelcoming environmental conditions for women. And these have been seen particularly in rural India. And also in rural areas, there are restrictive gender norms that can impact women's mobility and therefore their engagement with markets. So women's engagement with markets matters for three reasons. Firstly, women's involvement in the acquisition of food can lead to healthier food choices and food brought into the household. Also, with the increasing outmigration of men in rural areas, more women are taking on the responsibility of obtaining the food for the household. And lastly, from a women's rights standpoint, we want to ensure there is equal participation of women in public spaces, and markets include these public spaces. So in addition to these gender barriers, marginalized women can also experience inequalities that can intersect to influence their access to healthy diets. So for example, their income. In low income settings, healthy foods can be seen as unaffordable and lead to trade-offs between health, healthiness, taste, diversity, etc. The literature also underscores the important role of formal education, which can improve nutritional knowledge and lead to healthier food choices. However, in some rural settings, the investment in girls' education is discriminated against. And then in India, caste-based inequalities have been documented to lead to inequalities in access to food, such as fruits and vegetables. And given women's gender is closely intertwined with their caste, there's potential for such inequalities to be experienced by women here. However, how market food environments influence individual dietary patterns is mostly understood quantitatively so far. However, grasping the complex interplay between market food environments and individual level factors arguably requires qualitative insight to complement the current body of quantitative evidence. Considering this, our study aims to understand how gender and other forms of inequality shape women's experiences and interaction with their market food environment for acquiring nutrient-dense foods. So we employed a qualitative exploratory case study design in Bihar, India, which is located northeast India. Bihar is India's poorest state and is deeply entrenched with patriarchal norms. So therefore, women tend to experience barriers to things like access to resources, education, and decision-making, and so on. And for our fieldwork, we sampled two districts, Samastipur and Bhojpur. Samastipur is there on the right, Bhojpur is there on the left. And these two districts often experience undernutrition issues. And then within these, we sampled two blocks, and within each block, we sampled 3 villages, and we stratified this by remoteness to consider any potential barriers linked to physical access to markets. And then within each village, we sampled women aged 19 to 45 with a mix of socioeconomic backgrounds, things like wealth and education, and we also sampled some spouses and males. So in terms of our specific data collection methods, we used in-depth interviews to explore women's perceptions, feelings, experiences of their food environment, and also to understand any role their gender or any inequalities they experience played, and whether it's enabled or acted as a barrier to acquiring nutrient-dense foods from their food environment. We also completed some spouse interviews investigating their perceived barriers to nutrient-dense foods, to look at any commonalities, or perhaps more importantly, elicit any differences between the gender groups, and obviously to help elicit those more uniquely experienced by women. We then assess these individual perceptions at the group level using focus group discussion, and also explored any differences between women in these focus groups by using some participatory ranking exercise, which is then photo B, where we got women to organize and outline which barriers they found most significant or non-significant or least significant. And to analyze our transcripts, we use a combined deductive thematic approach alongside an inductive thematic approach. So inductively developing some themes corresponding to our domains of the study, so the market, food environment, gender, and inequality, and then use inductive thematic analysis to draw relationships between these in the context of nutrient-dense food acquisition. So overall, markets were key sources of nutrient-dense foods in Bihar, as we expected. However, the major barrier to their acquisition was their perceived unaffordability, as in markets, the prices for healthy food were more expensive than staples like rice and wheat. And as expected, this was mainly frequently raised by those who were poorer or on lower incomes. However, interestingly, we found that affordability could vary massively across the year, across certain seasons. And this wasn't just down to seasonal price spikes in these foods, but also overlaps with variation in cash flow, instability. And again, this affected those households which were less affluent, primarily those relying on seasonal employment, so like seasonal, casual, agricultural labor. And just briefly, in this calendar, the red indicates the most unaffordable periods, considering people's incomes and high prices, and then green's the opposite, so the more affordable with greater income and also lower prices. So you can quite clearly see in Bihar's monsoon rainy season, it's the most difficult for acquiring foods such as green vegetables and fruits, and this trend sort of flips into winter, becoming more affordable. And interestingly, fish was more affordable in the rainy season. However, due to certain religious practices, we didn't see an overly big increase in their consumption. So moving on specifically to women, we found that restrictive gender norms exacerbated these unaffordability barriers for them. And this was primarily due to their poor market access. And the various ways in which it did is kind of summarized in this figure here. So the orange arrows here correspond to our gender domain. The green is the market food environment domain, and the blue is the economic inequality domain. And the polarity at the end of each arrow indicates whether the previous variable has a decreasing or an increasing effect on the next variable. So for example here, an increase in the price of nutrient-dense food decreases the perceived affordability. So as mentioned, yes, the restrictive gender norms generally prevented women from going to markets, and these were implemented by people like spouses and the in-laws in their households. However, women also raised that markets were sometimes unsafe environments for them. As the first quote says, "We don't go to the market alone. We feel scared unless there is 5 of us." So further reinforcing these structural barriers to access markets. And as the second quote begins to say, women tried to get around these restricted gender norms by going to more distant markets where they're going to be less recognized, given they know they weren't supposed to be there. However, traveling was also a safety issue, and also increasing the physical distance there increased the dependence on transportation. However, transportation was costly and contributed to reducing food budgets. Again, something that was disproportionately experienced by the lower income consumers. As the third quote down there shows, 30 rupees for a round trip to the market. A sister may earn 50 rupees a day. So if she spends 30 rupees on the auto fare, what would be left? And secondly, another response by women was to instead rely on local outlets sort of within the village. And these tended to be mobile vendors which buy food from the market and then bring it to villages to sell. However, these tended to be of poorer quality and were also more expensive than markets, so kind of further compounding these unaffordability challenges for women. And perhaps more directly, we found that these norms also limited women's livelihood opportunities, reducing their affordability. So as the first quote says, women were not really able to go outside the village to work. They had to stay inside the village, but there was a lack of earning opportunities for them in there. Interestingly, we found women belonging to lower castes actually worked in agricultural labor. However, they were paid 50% of the men's wages as possibly a consequence of their gender or caste. And they reference this often when mentioning about the unaffordability of vegetables. So overall, due to this lack of individual income and also their employment in a sector that's very prone to seasonality, women were particularly vulnerable to those seasonal variations in affordability of nutrient-dense foods. However, given their lack of income, they did not want to adopt anything like loans because they feared of increasing debt. So in summary, the unaffordability of nutrient-dense foods constrains their acquisitions from markets, and gender-restrictive norms intersected with wealth, so low income, rurality, so remoteness, and barriers to employment with high and fluctuating unstable prices to exacerbate these economic barriers for women. And these manifested through their market inaccessibility and limited livelihood opportunities. And the severities of these barriers can vary over space, so the increasing remoteness, increasing dependence on transportation, and also time, so the changes over seasons. So our evidence suggests that gender transformative approaches are necessary to alleviate women's budget constraints, addressing affordability challenges directly, and also improve women's safety and inclusion in the marketplace. So how might this look? One option would be to increase or provide a women's cash transfer scheme. Some of the literature shows that cash transfers can increase women's food security and their acquisition of nutrient-dense foods, particularly among women on low income, and at the same time increase their decision-making power in the households relative to people like in-laws. And such financial mechanisms could be accounting for seasonal variations in affordability, so i.e. providing more assistance during the more challenging rainy season and perhaps less in the winter season to make such an option more viable. And to encourage the spending on cash transfers on nutrient-dense foods, behaviour change communications could also be employed concurrently. And to lessen their dependence on local outlets, more expensive outlets, and also to increase women's participation in markets, the creation of more gender-sensitive or women-friendly markets is also suggested. And one way to design these would be to co-design these markets with women and other stakeholders to ensure that the infrastructure, governance, and facilities are sensitive to women's requirements in the marketplace. Some examples of literature include the provision of gendered toilets, security personnel to make them feel safer, nighttime lighting so women feel safe attending these markets in after dark hours, female vendors, ideally those locally, so there's a familiarity aspect in the market, and women's only spaces that can accommodate visits from groups of women as traveling in groups would seem to be more safer. And lastly, India's national government has recently earmarked funds to create more rural markets and also upgrade existing markets, which could offer a potential funding source to facilitate this transition.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. So that ends our presentations, and we are running out of time, so I would invite all the speakers. Lily, I hope you are still with us. And then we would invite questions. I'll take the first 3 questions, and if we have time, then we would then increase it. Otherwise, we would call it a day. Okay, so I'm going to take 1 female, 1 male, and then at the back, and then we can move on. Yeah, first question.
Thank you. So my question goes to, I think he's Lutfred, yeah, from Tanzania. So you recommended on improving weekly markets to be incorporated in the policy in terms of the urban schemes, right? Now, the reason was that because they're accessible and they're affordable, but how do we ensure that after they're incorporated into the urban schemes, they'll still be accessible and affordable? That we know most of the time when it's already incorporated into the urban scheme, all the prices turn up, everything becomes more expensive, and then it's the same as them. They could have just remained as how informal they are. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Yeah.
Yes. Good afternoon. I am Jerome Quest with Cardesa. A quick question concerning the weekly market, but that may apply also to the other case studies. Do you have any insight on the impact of these markets on the farmers' revenues? Because we've seen the consumers have better food, but what about the farmers? Do the farmer get better prices for their products? That's question 1. Question 2 is when it comes to taxes. Most of these markets are informal, so do you have any clues on how they could contribute to the funding of public action?
Okay, thank you very much. Last question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My question goes to Lily, the first presenter. So during the course of our presentation, one key findings is the fact that food sharing have a significant effect on the dietary diversity. So it will be interesting to know what constitutes this food sharing in the context of the study. So is it food aid from the government or probably free donation from friends and family? So disaggregating this will be quite important, especially in line with policy recommendation, in order to know the right channel to direct efforts at. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the speakers, if you can take the questions, and yeah.
Yeah, I'll go first. Thank you very much. I didn't hear the name, so I'll just start with your question on what happens when they are brought or integrated into some formal governance structures. So, because of time, there's so much that we could not explain. But the thing is, these markets currently, as they're constituted, they have some features of informality, but also some features of formality, because the municipal governments do have people that sort of oversee the operations and also collect some fee from these vendors. Now, what we found is that um, these markets, I mean, the produce is affordable because, and this will connect to the second question, affordable because people go there once a week because they happen in their locality, and these vendors don't operate in one market; they operate in several. So today they'll be here, tomorrow they'll be in another market. So it's some sort of rotation. And what we found is that for these markets to be better integrated and preserve their attributes, it's important to make sure that at least this affordability, so the room to negotiate, and this relationship that is built between vendors and buyers is of course preserved. So there will be ways to think of how are they integrated and become part and parcel urban retail environment, and not saying we want them to be permanent markets. So integrated but retaining some of their unique beneficial attributes. The other is,
if you can summarize your answer.
yeah, the other is around whether farmers get better prices. Now, these are urban weekly food markets, and it's vendors who go and source their produce and come and sell to these households, rotating from one location to another. And because they sell in bulk, most buyers say they buy once a week. So at least it's good business for these people, for these vendors. So in a way, they make something. Taxes, as I said, there's a small fee that the government sort of collects from these markets.
Thank you, Lutfred. Let me allow Lily to take the other question, and then I'll come back to you. Lily,
Yes,
did
hi.
you hear the question? Okay, good.
Yes, I did. Thank you for that question. Yeah, that's an important distinction. So in the context where I work, there actually is no food aid in terms of external donations. Those simply don't exist in the context where I work. And actually, I would direct you to look at Bogard's 2021 food environment topology based on their work in the Pacific. And they actually separate food aid from these kind of external donations of food aid from food sharing between kin and community. So the food sharing that I was referring to in my presentation was very much about the sharing between family members and neighbors. And so, yeah, food sharing in this sense just simply means it's a simple act of giving or receiving food. That could be, harvesting extra vegetables and sharing it with your neighbor. It could also be inviting your neighbor over to come eat a meal together, for example. So these are different examples of food sharing.
Thank you. Thank you, Lily. Eileen, there was a question directed to you. You want to take it?
Exactly. There was no question directed to me, but I just wanted to react to the question about the impact of it was weekly market, but I think that with agroecological markets, we can have the same thought, the impact on farmer incomes. And actually, I think that Usually when we think about agroecological markets, we think that, yeah, it's good for the farmers because it's a way to reward the quality. But what was quite interesting in the study in Senegal is that first, it was not so easy actually to, yes, keep affordable agroecological products for consumers and at the same time reward this quality from farmers. But there was a very interesting leader of one of the agroecological markets who first said, I'm doing agroecological market products because I want to democratize these foods. So I want really to keep these foods affordable for the low-income consumers. And second, he said that this is possible. This is possible because doing agroecology means for me to reduce some cost, less fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, less pesticides, things like that. So just to insist that it's a very complex issue, but there are some initiatives that show that this is possible.
Thank you. Was there a question directed to you? Yeah, 1 minute.
Yeah, it's not direct to me, but it's related, especially the farmers' income. So this street vendors also help for the farmers to increase their income because it will. Most of those street vendors, they source the fruit and vegetable from smallholder farmers because smallholder farmers also struggling to get access for those supermarket. So it is benefited the consumer as well as the farmers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to all the presenters. Very interesting insights. So my question was about your findings with regards to meat versus legumes consumption. I was a little bit surprised because in your, let's say, in the main drivers that you identified of food group consumption, there was obviously income, low income, et cetera, and usually what we see is that when there's low income and people have low or limited purchasing power, they tend to purchase more cereals and legumes rather than meat and dairy. So is this a case where food culture is actually more important than income in food purchasing and intakes?
Thank you. There was one of the studies looked at gender, so I want to give one opportunity to balance the gender gap. Okay. Yeah, that's the last question. So just give it to one of the men.
So the question is for Lily, whether there is a difference difference found in consumption pattern among the food groups in response to market-based or the community or nature-based interventions that they were seeing, all the three groups they were seeing, that whether it is for green leafy vegetables, maybe food sharing and other things can be more responsive. But for other type of food groups, whether they have found any difference or they have tried to identify that is there any difference in response.
Okay.
Thank you.
You want to take it first? I think the other question is directed to Lily. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. It is a matter of preference and price. So in South Africa, the more preference is chicken and meat product for a source of protein, and the price of chicken is also very cheap. And I'm originally from Ethiopia, so for us, as you said, like household, mostly of protein is legume and pets, and then it's difficult to afford to buy meat and chicken. So that is the main thing, and that's a valid result.
Okay, thank you. Lily, you want to take the last question?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yeah, it shows like if I had more time, I could emphasize some things more. But yes, definitely different food environments were associated with different food groups, and also food sharing. You know, there's not much food sharing of meat and fish, for example. These are typically purchased in the market and they're more expensive. And so that typically is not what people would share. What people typically share are their surplus cultivated vegetables and things like that, or forest foods. If people go foraging for mushrooms, they spoil very quickly and people don't have refrigerators or electricity So it's a way to share your surplus so it doesn't spoil, and it builds goodwill in your community. But yes, so informal markets were associated with more meat and fish consumption. It increased people's odds. Whereas the natural food environment and wild cultivated food environments were more associated with these vitamin A rich fruits and vegetables. So we do see a bit of a food group substitution with this food environment transition with increasing market access.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our presenters. We want to give them a round of applause. All right, thank you so much. I think we are 1 minute above the time, so I will discharge you now. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for this exciting presentation to all the presenters and the chair, of course, and all of you for being totally involved in it.